right, welcome back to the Spirit-Led Business Summit, where we're talking to the different people who have contributed to my life over the last 30-something years in business. And Phil Davis is, Phil is, I always call him my branding guy. He's my buddy who helped me brand a lot with ideal marketers and everything over the years. I'm going to give you a little bit of his official introduction, and then I'll tell you a little bit about him. He's had 25 years of brand name development experience. He's probably the most quoted company naming expert globally, or he is the most quoted.
So they say.
So they say. So Phil has personally named or branded over 250 companies, products and services worldwide. Some of his work includes Pods. Every time I pass a Pods, I'm like, I know the guy who named that. Portable on-demand storage, Team Logic, Early Moments, Trading Block, and Double Cross Vodka. So they give you all the vodka you want for that one there.
Yeah, I was ready to drink at the end of that one.
Phil has written for and been quoted in Ad Age, The Washington Post, Inc. magazine, Wall Street Journal, Entrepreneur, Bloomberg Business Week, Salon, Boston Globe, Reader's Digest, and a whole bunch of others. And he's also a contributor to a lot of different, he does guest columns for startupnation.com, socialmediatoday.com, socialmediaexaminer.com, and a whole bunch of others. And he started in the marketing business with a full service ad agency down in Tampa, Florida, and built that up really big. And then did that for 17 years. And then he left that agency and went entirely into naming and branding and moved to the Blue Ridge Mountains of North Carolina, to Brevard, North Carolina. And in the book, I talk about how Phil helped start the White Squirrel Festival. And I tell that story in the book. Phil also does some kickboxing.
A little bit.
So that's always fun. Anyway, he's got a growing family there, and in the little town of Brevard, North Carolina. It's a cute little town. I went up there and visited him one time. So thanks for doing this, Phil. I appreciate you taking time.
No problem. It's always a pleasure, Marnie.
I owe a lot to Phil. I talk about pivot points specifically in the book that Phil taught me about, and we're going to be talking about that a little bit more in depth today from the master himself. So, but first, you told me when we reconnected that your business has really taken off a lot over the last, about 3 or 4 years, you said?
Yeah, it's the last 5 years, yeah.
And it kind of started with a kind of a funny situation. I thought you might want to share that story with the listeners.
Sure, especially being spirit-led, I think, Marnie, and you and I have had many conversations about this, we all aspire to be spirit-led, but that walk requires a lot of synchronicity and trust and faith. And let me just digress by saying this, and this is an example of the trust and faith. I have an oldest son, and we've talked our kids' stories. He's very strong-willed, strong-headed, and his name is Joseph. And he's just going at my second son, Benjamin, very biblical, Joseph and Benjamin. And I remember when Joe was probably about 2 years old or 3 years old, and he was just giving his brother the what for. Just wouldn't, just bossing him night and day. Finally, we sat him down and we said, Joe, here's the thing. You should try to let Ben be the boss sometimes. Let other people direct your life. You can't be the one doing it all the time. And he looked at us and kind of with this very perplexed look, and he goes, well, I try, Dad. I try to let him be the boss, but he won't do what I say. And I think the spirit-led business or the spirit-led life is a lot like that. It involves a certain degree of synchronicity, and it's like, God, help me, but let me know what you're doing. Dial in the plan, lay out the roadmap, and don't make me do a walk of faith. That's like walking the plank. So the control freak in all of us resist that. But if you can kind of relax into the spirit-led life and realize, and so some people that might be the universe, the language might differ around it, but that's really that subtle knowing in your heart of what it is that's going on. And so we can think logically, and it certainly has a purpose. I tell people a lot of times when you think logically, it's trusting the instruments on your plane. And when you go intuitively, it's like being aware and looking around and going, I know my instruments say this, but I see a mountain ahead of me. You know what I mean? So sometimes there's a balance. And when we lock in to that cerebral cortex and we say, we're only going to figure it out. I'm only going to work it if I can see what's going to work. It's like locking down on your instruments. 9 times out of 10, that's probably fine. But once in a while, it's going to miss something, or you tap on it and one of the instruments isn't working right. And something inside you goes, it feels like the plane's turning upside down. It feels like something's wrong. And so if you just take a moment and you relax and you look around, you'll see clues like the plane's tilting, other things that go, maybe my instruments aren't right. Maybe logic in this case doesn't prevail. And so in the situation you just talked about, the logic said, I'm getting on a little bit. I'm winding down my career. I should probably just chill. And I hired an assistant, much like the guy did that created Chicken Soup series, Chicken Soup for the Soul. He did the same thing. He found some gal on, I think, a Craigslist kind of ad. And would you be willing to work for an older guy doing his paperwork? It's not very glamorous. And she had responded, much like the gal that worked for me, and said, well, sure, that sounds like a good, in the gig economy, I'll do that. So I had her come over and she started working with me, and she made the, I guess this is where, if you're locked down, I would say the mistake of going, well, can't you just do this? Instead of doing what she was just told to do, she would always add, well, if we're going to do it that way, couldn't we improve it? Couldn't we do one more thing? It's like give a moose a muffin, if your listeners are familiar with that. And I would go, sure. Her name was Liz. I says, yeah, let's do that, Liz. Makes sense. Well, if you're going to do that, wouldn't you automate this? Okay, Liz, but if we're taking the business really serious, yes. But, that's something we could do. Well, but why aren't we taking it serious? Well, good point. One thing led to another, and all of a sudden we started getting busier. She was doing more of the automation processes. I was able to think and just create more, which led to more business. And so then she said, I've got a friend. Oh no, here it comes. So she had a friend that was an artist. And so we took on an artist, and then it got kind of crowded in the home office. So next thing you know, we expanded it to the basement, and then we built out the entire basement, and then we built a screen porch. And then we started bringing in lunches kind of thing. Again, Musa Muffin. The next thing you know, it was like, we need to go and get an office downtown. And before we knew it, now I'm up to 6 staff. We've blown through the office downtown and got a second office downtown. We ended up getting ranked on the top 5 naming firms globally. And we're back at it. Not really by design as much as it was by seeing what was unfolding in front of me and making a decision. Is that permissible? So it doesn't really require you forcing it to happen. Can you be comfortable in that moment and allow that to unfold? Or you can kind of shut it down. You can kind of resist and say, this doesn't fit my mental plan, my instruments. This isn't where the navigation point that I thought I was going to in my career. I just remained open to it and let it manifest itself. And sometimes things just want to manifest themselves. And you can be that willing conduit. And if you shut down, that's fine. It'll probably most likely just go through another conduit. It'll find another person to express that. And so that's, I think, what I give recognition to is this is just something that wanted to happen in the universe. And I was witness to it.
So there seems to be something underlying in there that you didn't overtly say, but you did say is you didn't really care.
Yes.
I mean, you didn't have a dog in that fight. It was
no.
I've got to build this thing into this big thing, and I'm just driven to do it. There was, you just got out of the way, and that's what it became. And my dad used to say, if you want to make money and you need to make money, you can't make a dime.
That's exactly it. There's a huge paradox in that, Marnie, and we've all experienced it. When you want something, it holds the want in place. And it's so maddening because you go, and here's what happens. It really exposes the ego, right? You go, it's like telling the ego, it's like a little impetuous 3-year-old. Well, you're not getting this because you're yelling. I won't yell. Can I get it now? It's like, well, that's not exactly what I meant. It's still manipulating, conniving. It really takes that complete release. Like you really are okay. You're not indifferent. You are okay. And that's a huge difference. It's not apathy. It's just, that's fine. When you realize in life, and it takes enough bumps on the head to realize this, that when you create a plan in your life and you insist that it goes that way, half the time it works out beautifully and half the time it's a disaster. When you let things go and let them develop and you just follow the breadcrumbs, then half the time it works out and half the time it's a disaster. The only difference between the two scenarios is your state of mind. One, you're frantic and frenetic and controlling. And then the second one, you're just allowing it to. It's not that you'll get incredible results the second way and horrible results one way. It's not a guarantee. It's just, do you want to observe life and see where it goes? Or do you want to control and manipulate it to death? And you will have consequences with both ways. But one, to me, is a little bit less of a stressor of a life, because you become a witness to your life instead of a driver of your life.
Like, you see more of the miracles in it when you're not so obsessed about it. I think you're starting
Yes.
the serendipitous. You're a little bit more grateful for things when they work out. I think sometimes
Yes.
the way you think, I did it. It's kind of a different attitude.
Absolutely, Marnie. There's a wonderful series of stories, and not just one. On 911, when life interrupted. 911, probably not a better singular event that we can think of than that. And everybody's planes were rerouted. And that is the destiny of our life. We all are in the air and we're all going somewhere. Probably everybody on those planes that day had something in mind that they had to get to. And I don't remember the exact city. I think it was in Nova Scotia, where a whole bunch of these planes were grounded. And it went from, at first, oh my gosh, this throws a monkey wrench in everything. When they realized the gravity of the situation, everybody kind of said, okay, this is what it is. But the townspeople came out and opened up their homes, their hearts, and their lives to these people in such a way that they just melded and connected for like 3 days in this small little town up in Canada. And to this day, they have reunions now on anniversary dates.
Oh, wow.
All the people in the plains and all the townspeople come back together. And that, to me, is a life interrupted, a life that didn't go as planned. But is it a bad life? Is it a bad outcome?
That's a neat story. I never had heard that.
Yeah.
Huh. Now, I don't know if you want to talk about this, because you didn't tell it in the story that you just said, but you told me about a little bit of a catastrophe that sort of led you into working with this gal. Wasn't it like the...
Oh, absolutely. So again, serendipity. Here I was thinking, I can see how this is going to go. I'm going to freelance a little bit. I'll keep my expenses way down. Again, control. Why? Because I can manage that better. See, if I grow, there's less ability to manage. Somebody said years ago, I would feel so much better if I just had control over people, places, events, and time. That's all I'm asking, God. And so, when I can say, well, my only overhead is my mortgage, and I can buy some office supplies, and I can do this with very minimal amount of money, and I can do it. But the day that I think it was the day that I had her come over to the house to show her what I needed to do. She was going to put pretty pictures online for me. That was it. And I had someone do this for me before, and they did it very well, and they didn't push me to do anything more. They just were very compliant and willing, but not this one. So she comes over, and bless her heart, if we're not a day into this, and I say, well, I need to be so many pixels by so many pixels, and I only need you to do this. And lo and behold, a pipe breaks, or the bathtub overflows downstairs in our master bedroom, and it floods the basement. Just absolutely floods it. So it goes from, and in between doing these pictures, I need you to run downstairs and help me haul $20,000 worth of electronics, insulation, flooring, everything else out of here, because the place was just in pieces. They came over and said it had done something like $20,000 in damage. And at that moment, I was like, I just can't believe this. I don't know how this is ever going to work out. Now I'm going to be weeks out of work trying to deal with this, yada, yada, yada. Very long story short, it turns out that since we had to rebuild the basement, that's the point at which, when we got a few weeks into it, the suggestion was made, well, if you're rebuilding the basement, why don't you just rebuild it in a very neutral way to have it be an office? So instead of working out, hunched over a computer in a home office and a spare bedroom, suddenly I was in 1,500 square feet that would completely remodeled space that was now my, a pretty nice home office situation. And that's allowed us then to hire this extra person who became the art person to do the logo design. And by doing that, I was hiring 2 local people. So it benefited the local economy. It helped a couple of younger millennials get their feet wet in a business. I was able to mentor and they were able to gain skills to then mature and grow on their own. So it was definitely a win-win-win. I was just kind of the indifferent participant.
Yeah. It's funny how those things that look like catastrophes turn around and end up being.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I can say almost without a doubt that the things I went, oh, great in life, I ended up saying, oh, great. And it's the flip flop of that. There's so much paradox. And when you see the paradox in life, the more you realize that in reality, the things we fix, I'm in branding, so we create stories. Stories are great. They create context and create structure, but very few of them are absolutely true. They're relatively true. And when we fixate on a story, and when that story becomes identified with who we are, it becomes inflexible and it breaks. It breaks us. But the more that you can hold your story, it's just your story. It's just a story. It's a story of me. It's not the absolute truth. It's a relative truth about me. The more that you can just be witness to it and behold it and let it just evolve and be what it wants to be. And you don't have to crank down on it. When we look at politics, for example, people are identifying so much with ideas that aren't them. They're just ideas. They're positionalities. And when we over-identify with things like opinions, our thoughts, the way we think life should be, and we lock down, then we can't be open to just life experience itself through us.
Yeah, things just are, and it's the stories we attach to them. Most
Yes,
that give them their meaning.
absolutely. Things just are. So I will tell you this, I'm constantly exploring this realm of who we are, who we think we are, brand identity. I got into it because I wanted to understand, who am I? At my core of core, who am I? There was a story that came on, and they were doing a reality show about people that were trying to find their true parents, their adopted children. And it was kind of a reality show. So let's go out and let's go find somebody, and a series of people who are just looking desperately for their parents. And that's a sense of, who am I? You know what I mean? It's like,
Mhm.
are you my mother? It's like,
Yeah.
So this gal came in, she was about 30 years old that was being featured. I thought this was fascinating. And when we talk about story and believing your story, she thought she was an abandoned baby. That's what she bought into. My mother did not want me. I'm an unwanted person. What a horrible place in life to be. And that's the story she felt about herself, that she was unwanted. And she lived with that story to where it's just on her sleeve. She just wore it on her sleeve. And so when they interviewed her, she said, I want to find my mom and find out why she abandoned me, why she didn't love me, why she left me. And so they did this search, and they finally found this woman, and she looked like she'd had some years that she had lived. And when they connected them, the first thing the mother said was just beside herself in tears. Said, I have wanted you from day one. I have always saw you. I've thought about you night and day. And the girl was so like, wait a minute, this is not the picture. This is not the story. My mother abandoned me. She goes, oh no, I didn't. I was barely 18 years old. My parents made me give you up kicking and screaming. And I wrote a beautiful letter to you. And I told you how much I loved you. And I gave it to the nurse. And she said, that nurse never gave that to me. There was no message. And it turns out the nurse back in those days, they felt like they needed a clean break. So they just tore up the letter. The important thing here is this: she lived a life that was a lie. She lived a life of a story that was not true, that she was in fact very loved. What's interesting is, how did she move going forward? Because it was, as much as she wanted to know she was loved, she could not move forward with this new identity because it didn't fit her narrative about herself. If you cower, your shoulders come forward, you're hesitant, you feel unwanted and loved, and that's the story of you. Your brain actually develops in your neural network a cellular structure that feeds and adapts to those feelings. You become addicted to those feelings. Someone tells you the opposite of who you think you are, it really is a mind job. Now she was a beloved, wanted person that her mother was desperately searching for years and years and years, because she loved her so dearly. How, how? Think about that. How do you arrange that story now when you've told yourself, and maybe you created a pity party story to everybody that you know, every new boyfriend, every new relationship? Well, here's a little bit about me. I'm an unwanted child. I was left. My mother didn't care about me. I was dropped off at some doorstep. And when the exact opposite was true. So if that's the case, what lies and what misconceptions and what misconstrued stories are we telling about ourselves that are just that? They're not necessarily true. They're not necessarily untrue. They're not necessarily right or wrong. They're stories. And we are more than our stories.
I love that. I love that. That is such a really good example of it.
Yeah,
Wow.
that touched me when I saw that. I thought, she's lived with pain. And we don't have a choice in life. We're going to find pain, but we have a choice when it comes to suffering.
Definitely. And everything has the good and the bad in it. And
Yeah.
you say, okay, there's these two things. I can either focus on the bad or I can come over here and look at the good side of it and just say, oh, well, the bad is just the price of the good thing. I'll take the good thing. It's worth it.
It just is. So I love these things. I do these things called thought experiments. And it is, if that's true, then what? Instead of just locking down and going, well, so my son was talking to me about wages and wage equality the other day. And I have acorn and tree. I could see it coming. Oh no, we got another one. And so we're having this discussion the other day. He goes, Dad, think about it. He says, I was listening to this guy the other day, and he said that up to a certain point, money does buy happiness. When it comes to, I have no money and I can't eat, you feel pretty happy when you can suddenly eat a sandwich. And when you get a house and you get heating and lights. But he says, but once your basic necessities are met, it's a diminishing return. Going from meeting your basic needs to a wonderful, wonderful life, your happiness doesn't go up 10 times more. It's marginal. You feel marginally happier. And it might get to the point where you have too much and you become unhappy. The point being, he said, the figure right now in the economy to live a life where you feel relatively comfortable and not threatened, it's about 75,000. And he said, so the idea with some people out there is that's how much then everybody should make. If we all can get people to make like 75 grand, everybody's needs to make, we'll all be happy. He said, but think about this. He goes, Dad, if everybody made exactly $75,000, we're all exactly the same. And he says, at that point, it doesn't matter if it's called 75,000, a million, or $1. It's just the same. And people freak out at that. We're trying to do all the time. We're trying to either become like everybody else or we're trying to become different. We say we want to join together, but our egos deep down, if you join, and I realize that you and I, Marnie, and everybody collectively are just one people, one heart, one mind, your ego starts freaking out that you're going to lose that your special snowflakeness. So there's this desire that we all come together, and there's a desire equally that we all come apart. And that ebbs and flows in our lives. It comes in, it comes out. I want to be separate. Don't engulf me. Don't engulf me. And I need to be part of something. I don't want to be alone and isolated. We vacillate that because we don't know who we are. Because deep down, we are the infinite. We're indescribable. And there's nothing that you can say except by negation. You can say what you aren't, but you'll never really be able to, using English language, use in words. You cannot objectify yourself because there's no object that is you.
I love that. That's so true. I think we've talked about this concept before about the need to be unique yet belong. It's just that wrestle that goes inside of all of us. Love that. So in the book, I talk about pivot points.
Yes.
And my own pivot point and kind of how I came to, or you helped me with that. And then also I've refined it a little bit since over the last 5 or 6 years. So what is a pivot point in your words? What is that?
Well, I always refer to the term that everybody's familiar with, or the usage of it that everybody's familiar with, which is basketball. And I would give these presentations and I would say, anybody out there who understands basketball, if I have a basketball in my hand and I have one foot planted and the other foot over here, and I pivot, I turn, one foot turns, the other one stays where it's planted, have I created an infraction? Have I created a foul or anything wrong? And most people that know basketball go, no, absolutely. I said, let me ask you this. Can I turn my back on you? Can I go completely the other way around? And they looked and said, well, yeah, as long as you don't move that one foot. I said, but what happens if I start moving both feet and I grab the ball and I just start moving along and I'm not anchored to that one point? They go, well, that's traveling. They call it traveling. And it's kind of weird. You are traveling. You're not staying steadfast. And I said, well, that is your pivot point. Now, here's the real question. And that everything we've said today leads up to this. That pivot point is a sense of who you are and your identity. You can pivot on the outside and be one thing and flip to the other if you know who you are on that one point that remains. If it's grounded and founded in something eternal and timeless. But if that pivot point you think is your role or your identity, a successful entrepreneur, a great mother, a school teacher, all those things are relative identities, but they are not absolute identities. You are not going to be a school teacher forever. You'll retire. Your mom years, you'll always probably be a mom, I would think, but you're not going to be serving the role of a mom. And we feel this emptiness and loss when we don't have that role anymore because we associate it with us. And it's not us. So I help either people or clients say, what is it at your core? What is your essence? So we have essence and we have appearance. Essence is your pivot point. Appearance is that other leg that swings wildly around and it almost sometimes look contradictory. But you say, but it isn't. If you look at a company, look at Facebook. Well, 10, 15 years ago, it was a place to judge women and score them on a scale of 1 to 10 in college. That was the original beginning. We're going to rank women. We're going to objectify women, and we're going to do this harsh thing. And it's only on college campuses. And you had to have a .edu to even get a page. And now what is it? It's grandparents sharing pictures of their grandkids. It's the same company. But what is it that they pivoted on was that sense of connecting people. They connected people. Now, it was nefarious in the beginning, but as they became more expansive and they realized we don't just have to connect people in a college environment, we can connect wider than that. We can open it up. And now Mark Zuckerberg says his goal really is to connect the world. And that's way different than seeing like a yearbook, a face version of a yearbook, Facebook. Apple started off and said, we are Apple computers. But they're not a computer company. When they pivoted, they're not pivoting around the idea that they're a computer company. They're pivoting around something way beyond computers. And we all know what it is. And we know when Apple breaks it. We know when they're true to that thing, and we know when they're not true. If someone came in and said, I've got this device from Apple, it's a huge black box, and it's really heavy, and it's full of technology, you'd go, that's not an Apple product. Right?
Right. So
yeah.
Slim and sleek and
yes.
and
We can describe it. That's Apple.
Yeah.
You know? So I went into a conference one time and I said, hey, did you guys hear Apple's coming out with this new thing? It's coming out next week. There's a sign-up list on it. It's super cool. It's super small. It's $79. Is anybody, if you don't know about it, I can sign you up. Who wants it? And hands started going, oh my gosh, yes. How much? $79. $79. And I said, no, just stop. What have you just bought? And everybody went, what do you mean? What did you just buy? Well, I don't really know. It was an Apple thing and it was $79. And I had people raising their hands left and right. Some of them were saying what a deal it was for just $79.
What they were so I was thinking it's not priced high enough. I'd be like, you sure it's an Apple product? It's not.
Yeah. You know, I haven't told them what it was yet. And they were like, well, I'll take it. Put me on the list. Because they were buying essence. They were buying essence.
So how is a pivot point different than a tagline?
Oh, great question. And therein lies the difference. So your pivot point, can I give you an example? We had a company come to us and they said, we have the rights to Dr. Seuss, Little Einstein, kind of a big deal. Okay. And they're going to put this online. And it was a guys, gotta love them. They mean well. Us guys, we mean well. And I said, well, where are you at with it? And he goes, well, if we don't hire someone like yourself, we've got a name we've been playing with internally. And I said, well, what is it? He says, Readior. I said, Readior? He says, yeah, like a reading meteor. Like I'm just thinking like a shooting star or something. And I'm going, wow, that's kind of interesting. So like a shooting cosmic burning rock that explodes into the planet, you know? And and he goes, yeah, because it's all about reading. It's all about reading. We're bringing reading materials to kids. And I said, well, okay, well, again, going back to what is essence? What is the pivot point? What is the real thing that you are pivoting around? So I said, can you just send me everything? everything about your company. Let me just take a look at it. He started sending me files over. And I noticed something extremely interesting, Marnie. For being a reading site, it was very, very sexist, extremely sexist, because it was only women. Every photo had a woman in it. And it's very ageist because the women only had 3-year-olds and below on their laps. So this is a very discriminating site. It just was. I mean, they were just biased against every man and against children over 3. So I brought it up to him, what a horrible site he had. I said, have you noticed that every one of your pictures, every one of your photos has a mom holding a child, and none of those children can be older than 3 or 4? He's like, well, what's your point? I said, you told me this is a reading site, but I don't see the reading as much as I see parent and child bonding experiences. He just paused for a moment. And he goes, come again? I said, well, if it's reading, everybody would be reading. You boys, girls, men, women, everybody be reading their brains out. But what I see here is this moment in time where you are exchanging this precious, precious experience of reading to your child. So the value there, what you're bringing to them is this shared experience, this mother-child reunion. And the vehicle they're doing it with is through reading. So you should lead with your pivot point. And this comes back to your tagline. It is and it isn't. If your tagline is aligned with your pivot point, yeah, it can be your tagline. But they said, what do you think we should call this? And so after doing quite a bit of pondering on this and really getting into that headspace, we ended up calling the site earlymoments.com. The tagline was sharing the gift of reading. And every single photo had a mom embracing their child and having a wonderful experience. What's interesting is the owner over this gentleman couldn't get his head around it. Well, I don't get it. And what if we do go to this market? And that just sounds like a sissy name. He actually tried to change it. The women there were largely editors. They embraced the name. They loved the name. The people going to the site loved the name. They ended up hiring another branding firm after us to rename it. They spent tens of thousands of dollars. They did testing, they did studies, and nothing resonated higher than this one, not even close. They finally came back to us and said, beat your own name. And we couldn't come up with a name that scored higher than the name he had, because it was never about reading. The pivot point was sharing the gift of reading. It's the sharing moment, the bonding moment.
Okay, so that's a really good example of the difference between the two. So tell me again, it was Early Moments and then sharing the gift of reading.
So Early Moments was the name of the company. It was very aligned with who they were. The tagline was sharing the gift of reading. And the tagline should align with your pivot point. Your pivot point, I know for me, my joy in life is creating environments where people thrive. That's what just does it for me. Creating an environment where people thrive. So if I was to create a company that was aligned with that, my tagline needs to be aligned with that pivot point. What is it that would do that? Creating an environment where people thrive. It should be with it. Now, what most people do with their taglines is they just create hooks. The number one blah, blah, east of the Mississippi River. And they are a differentiator. Sure, I see how you're different, but it doesn't connect with who you are. Again, going back to that, you can pivot on things like, I'm a basketball player, to use basketball, but you're going to retire from basketball. You can pivot on, I'm a successful business person, and then you have a bad year financially. So it's not that you can't pivot on these things. I would just say you should think it through, because if that's your pivot point, it should be a deeper, more profound. When you build a house, you do not build your house upon sand. I think we're admonished. We build it upon stone or rock. And what is your rock? What is your stone? What is the immovable in you that will never change no matter what happens with your circumstances?
Okay, so my next question I know you cannot possibly answer. I don't know how many ever minutes we've got left. But if you were to point someone in the right direction of them figuring out what their pivot point is, what advice would you give them to?
I have a very, very good exercise for that. But I want to warn the listener that they should probably turn this off right now, because once they hear this, they can't unhear it. And it's like solvent. Okay. And this will destroy your ego. But it's simply, and I just came upon this because I myself, Marnie, and I think you and I connect in a lot of ways because we're in the same search, fellow travelers. I was trying to find what is the source of the pain in my life and what is the significance that I'm looking for. And what I found the greatest solvent that you can do in your life is every time you are possessed with an idea, a desire, a want, ask yourself this: so I can what? So I can what? Well, I just really need to become number one in my industry. So you can what? Well, then that would make me an authority. Okay, you're an authority. Boom, thought experiment. You're an authority. Now what? Well, then I could charge more. Okay, you're an authority and you're charging zillions of dollars. The world wants you and you're making bank. So you can what? Well, then I can buy the things I want. Okay, now you're buying. What are you buying? Yachts, boats, homes, Yes, all of it. Now you've got yachts, boats, and homes. So you can what? Follow that until you cannot answer anymore, and you will have your bedrock. Just keep following. I have a place, 2 or 3 places it usually lands, but I'll let the listener find it for themselves. I don't want to shortcut them.
Yeah, I was going to share an example, but maybe that would be too. Maybe I shouldn't give them any examples.
I think it's fine to share. I'm just saying I've been through this experience, and it usually doesn't land on a lot of physical objects. There's a lot of irony in asking, so I can what? And I will give you this bit of a hint. You will find in many, many ways, it's very circular. A lot of the things you deeply, deeply, deeply are looking for, you have right now.
Mm.
Some people call it the diamond in your pocket.
Yeah. I use this all the time, and I've taught my husband, unfortunately, so now he uses it on me.
Oh, no.
Because I was just, when I was releasing the book, I'm like, I just want to sell, X number of copies of this book.
Yeah.
And he's like, so you can do what?
Yes.
Just like,
yes.
And I go through this whole thing.
Come on. I got to be a best-selling author. Well, that's great. So you can what?
Yeah,
I can write more books.
And the funny thing is my pivot point is fostering freedom. Okay. Yeah. So ironically, it went back to freedom. By the time I drilled it all down, it came to this freedom thing.
Well, there is a little bit of a cheat there, but that's one of them. Many so I did this exercise with this group, and this Vistage group, which is all these, fairly well-off business people. And this one guy goes, well, financial security, right? And I said, okay, so what are you going to do with financial security? He goes, well, then I could finally once and for all not have to worry about paying bills and everything. I said, so you're not paying bills and everything, right? What do you want to do with that ability to not have to pay bills or not do anything? He goes, well, I finally would have time to be with my children. And he just gets super quiet. And some of these are just major aha moments. And these are intelligent people. We're all caught in this madness. And he goes, so I'm working 85 hours a week so I can be more with my children. Hello, no one's home, Dad. Cat's in the cradle. Yeah.
You got to tell this story that you've told me, I don't know how many times, and I quote it now. The one about the fishing boat, the guy with the fishing boat.
So this is the Zen story, these Zen parables, which I just love. And the Zen parables is just basically removing the filters and looking at life exactly as it is. So there's this man, and he's just very, just very relaxed on a beach, and he's native to whatever island he's from. And he throws this handcrafted little lure out into the water, and a massive fish bites at it and pulls it in. And this Englishman comes along and goes, that's amazing. What have you got there? And he says, oh, what do you mean? He goes, what is that little gadget you got? He goes, well, it's just something I made and using local products, and I sourced it. And so it's locally sourced, and it's this, and it doesn't have gluten in it. This is incredible. You've got the most amazing product in the world. He goes, you call it a product. This is just how I catch fish. That's all I know. And he goes, well, then you're a fool, because you know what this is worth to other people in the world. And he goes, no, I have no idea. He goes, oh, a lot. Let me come with me and I'll show you. So he gets him in little hut, and he has them says, if you make me 10 of these, I'll give you the, oh, if that makes you happy, sure, I'll make 10 of them. And then other people start buying them, and then he goes online. Of course, he has a website. And so he creates a website, and he's selling millions of these, and the guy's getting older, and he's getting on in his years. And finally, the Englishman comes back to him and says, did I not steer you wrong? He goes, look at this. I told you someday this would pay off. And he gives him this big fat check. I mean, let's just say it's $10 million. And he says, now you can finally do what you want. What is it that you'd like to do? Your dream of dream in your heart of hearts. He says, well, I just want to go back to the beach and go fishing with that lure that I had.
A lot of times we have the very thing that we're looking for.
I took a little 40-year detour there, but it's funny. When I was 18 years old and I was just starting college, I did this kind of land contract deal. The wheels were spinning and everything. And I got a hold of this house. It was $18,000 at the time. And it was on the north branch of the White River. Like, picture this. Now, it wasn't, the most picturesque place, but it had potential. Downstairs in the basement, it had a handcrafted fireplace, but it was rough. The doors weren't finished. The house wasn't finished. It needed some work, but it was a 2-bedroom, 1-bath, small little place on the north branch of the White River. And of course, at 18, 19 years old, my head was just swimming with where I needed to get in my life, how I needed to get on with it. I was going to community college, and that's not good. I need to go to a real college. And what am I going to do for a career? And what am I? And I would sit in that backyard and I would just spin. God, I just hope things work out for me. Please. I just ruminating and just fixated. And one time when I was sitting there, I saw this little wiggle in the water, and salmon were going up it. I said, wow, this stream was only like 4 or 5 feet across. And I was like, that's crazy. I didn't know they went this far up the river. And these were sizable fish. And I just remember thinking, oh, I don't have time for this. I've got to get to work. Long story short, I ended up going back to work, and I thought, I can't work in this. I was up in Muskegon, Michigan. I can't live in this industrial town. I've got to get out. I've got to get a real job. I've got to get a real education. I quit. I went back to school. I went to Michigan State. I got a degree. I traveled the world. I started doing all kinds of things. And then I started writing down things that, as I began to manifest, what is it that you really want in life? And there's nothing wrong with that. Absolutely nothing wrong with that. I wrote down, what is it that you want in life? I began to write down, someday when this is all done, I want to just relax. What does that look like to me? Well, that would just be like a cabin or something. And what would it look like? Well, I'd probably have a stream out back. And then what would it have? Well, ideally, it'd be neat if it had fish. Oh my goodness. I had this when I was 18. I would have paid for it 12 times over by now. But I had to get out of that hellhole that I was living in.
Okay, so one more question.
Yes.
You told me something that you do every day that helps you live a spirit-led life. Okay, there's a quick question you ask every day. Could you share that?
So I wish I could say it was every day. Every day when I'm mindful and I think, and I always have better days when I do this. So there's a hint right there. Usually I have that same mindset that we all do, which is the tick-tack list, check it off. What do I need to do? Oh my goodness, it's another day. The tyranny of the urgent and the immediate. And I found myself one day sitting there thinking all this. I thought, well, this is so narcissistic. Even though it seems like I'm getting things done, it's always some list I have in my mind of what I need to do to get everything I need in my life taken care of. And I thought, what would that look like? How could I look at that differently? And you think, oh, I should be more thoughtful. That's just shooting on yourself. I should be doing this. I should be doing that. And then that's just, again, another way of just working around your ego. Well, if I do this, I'll ingratiate myself if I look like I'm a kind person. People will think better of my ego if I appear like I'm nicer. And so all is so deviant, that little child in us, that impish little thought construct of who we are, that isn't us. It parades as us. We shop it as ourselves, but it gets in the way. I thought, what is it? What is a different way of just looking at it? It's more neutral. Again, neither left nor right. I'm open to both. And I thought, what if you just ask yourself, just pick a very neutral word. It's not laden with anything specific. What is the universe asking of me today? What is the universe asking of me today? And you become aware. Because I think deep down in us, for whatever reason, I believe the gift within us is benign. I do believe people are inherently good. And when you touch base with your true essence of who you are, not that, if there's an evil in the world, it's the egoic sense of self that is it's a phantom. So it parades as evil because it doesn't know what to do with itself. It knows that it is inherently a false entity. But when we connect with our true nature, it's a giving, loving nature. It's a God nature. It's the universe expressing itself through us. And when you ask of that, you will say, the universe in and of itself, in a spirit-led life, wants to put things in order. I don't know why. I didn't make the rules. It's just that way. And so for me, I would sit and think, my second oldest needs some attention. Or I should take this one out to lunch. Or I should take more time and do this. And the quality of the response is so much different, and it's less tyrannical when you ask what it's the universe asking of me today, rather than what do I need to do to get my objectives met. And it goes back to that thing, Marnie, when you say, I'm just going to tick these lists, I'm going to get it done, I'm going to make it happen. You can choke life to death. You can try to make things happen. Moses smote the rock and did not get into the promised land. So if you're smiting the rock, you might just want to take a lesson from that guy and say, if you want to walk into the promised land, you got to let go. You got to let go.
Like that. Is there anything else you'd like to add?
Well, I love to create environments where people thrive. If somebody finds a connection, whether they share it with you or post it, I think it's wonderful if they can contribute the feedback and pay it forward. How is it that you can take this and manifest this in the lives of other people?
And people can reach you at tungstenbranding.com, right?
Yeah, it's what I do for a day job. It's some of it's pretty sterile, but I create false identities. I create an identity because it's not good or bad. An identity is a functional thing. It's hard to go out in the world and if somebody at the driver's office says, well, what is your name? You need a driver's license. I am beyond name or description. I am God's finest creature. It's kind of doesn't serve itself. But
Prince's symbol.
Right, exactly. I'm everything fluid. Everything cannot be defined. So we hold that sense of identity, and I have found that people need that. I create identities because people need it. I'll leave you with one quick Zen story, if you don't mind, Marnie. This is what I do for a living in a nutshell. A wise man walked down a river one day, and he saw a group of brothers crying and tearing their clothes, just ripping their robes apart, distraught. Came upon them and said, what seems to be the problem? They go, oh, it's just a horrible time you've happened upon us. We just crossed this turbulent river here that we're walking along. And when we got to the other side, one of us died, drowned, horrible, terrible death. He goes, oh, that is, I am so sorry. Which one of you died? And they said, to make matters worse, here's where we feel terribly ashamed. We consider ourselves loving people. We don't even know which one of us died. And he's a little bit puzzled, and he says, well, then how do you know one of you died? He goes, because we're 10 brothers. And the oldest jumped up and said, I'll prove it to you right now. Line up. So the brothers lined up, and he counted 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And he immediately saw the old wise man immediately saw the error of their ways and went to say something. He goes, no. Listen, it's not just me. Here, he asked the younger brother, step up in line. And he stepped back and said, now count it again. 1, 2, 3, 4, 7, 8, 9. And they kept rotating and counting and rotating and counting. And he realized, I can't stop their way of thinking. I cannot stop that thinking. The disease, the dis-ease is the dis-ease. It's the dis-ease in us. We are missing. We are not complete. We are not whole. It is the lie that we live with that makes us seek fulfillment all the time. So he felt, rather than trying to mentally get through to them that they're not this story of loss and terror and a death and the river taking them away, he said, let me just do this. How about if I count? And they said, well, I don't know what difference it made. You just saw us count. He goes, well, humor me. I'll count. So he stands there and counts all 10. And they looked at each other in amazement and go, what kind of voodoo is this? How did you bring us back? We're all here. And they begin to joyfully embrace each other and just weep with joy. And they turned around and said, you are the greatest man ever. That's what I sometimes feel like. I am just here to show people their true nature. And the joy of that sometimes spills over, but I feel like I'm only telling you what is true. So that's branding. I'm giving you an identity, and that's making you really, really, really happy, and that's great.
Well, so if you need anybody to find you or to count all your parts, call Phil.
Yes. Yeah.
I always love your philosophy. So thanks for sharing it with us today.
All right. Thank you, and I wish the best to your listeners.